first time he saw her, she was wreathed in space, mist, and defiance, a dagger pressed to his throat, and the world stopped breathing. Star Captain Sterling Raylord of the Galactic Unity had defeated empires, bargained with the brutal AI god kings, and left star systems weeping. But nothing had prepared him for Galexandra, the exiled Outer World's techno-witch with computer force in her vein and her father's crypto destiny on her lips. The woman fate itself had written into his destiny in blood and starlight. She was born to hate him. He adored her on sight. He was forbidden. She craved his strong arms. And when they end up marooned on a mystical space planet and an ancient prophecy awakes, they must learn the ancient truth that will free the future, that passion is the deadliest hacker of all. A helmet of jewels, a kiss of ruin, and a love that could open realms unknown. Welcome to Realms Unknown, a weekly speculative fiction podcast brought to you by the Bugle, in which we have sassily fought our way up from the slums of Underland to claim our destiny, discussing tropes, news, our favourite old shows, new shows, books, games, and more in science fiction fantasy. I'm your host, author and comedian Alice Fraser, and my companion on this journey, the Han Solo to my Chewbacca, the Newt to my Ripley, the Fitz to my Fool, the Cassian to my Rhysand. It's romance editor and podcaster Jen Prokop. Welcome to the show.
Hello. You know, I've listened to some of your episodes and was like, this is perfect for us, for romance, right?
I was pushing for romance to be included in speculative fiction as a genre because I think it is sort of I have a lot of thoughts. I feel like it's a melodramatic world in which you write large these sort of small, minuscule human interactions that you can't actually necessarily put your finger on in the real world. You know, in the way that science fiction will let you explore what if this to the nth degree.
Right.
In romance fiction, that scenario where like she's tired, he comes home, she like reaches out for a moment of connection, he's like too busy or in his head, she goes to the room to have like a few deep breaths. Like in a romance novel, that's him being like a cold duke, and then she rides off into the highway, and he has to like ride after her and fight bandits, and then they fuck in a hut because it's raining. In the real world, he has to like go into the room, fight the bandits of his masculine toxicity, and like put a hand on her shoulder and be like, "You're right, babe." Like,
thanks for making dinner.
Exactly. So I feel like it is part of the same world to me. A reminder to our listener to subscribe to the Bugle channel, and all the books and shows and games that we cover here will be in the affiliate store. The link is in the show notes. We will begin, of course, with our news section. If anybody wants some sci-fi or fantasy news, here is the place to get it. Narnia news, speculative fiction news. Apparently, there is a casting rumor that they will cast Aslan as Meryl Streep. Jen, how do you feel about Meryl Streep playing Aslan?
I feel okay. I'm going to just try and take that in. I mean, listen, I do believe Meryl Streep can do anything, I suppose. So why not the Jesus lion? I mean, right? But it does seem like just her voice.
See, I don't know. I feel like I am okay with this casting if they don't do it like CGI, if they don't do it animated, if it's just Meryl Streep acting so good that you believe she's a lion.
Right. I have an actual terrible visual, like, as soon as you said it, of, like, I don't know if you guys remember that old TV show, like, the Teletubbies, where, like, someone's face is just sort of, like in the sun. And if it's Meryl Streep's face in, like, a CGI lion, I don't want it. I don't.
No, I don't think I could accept that either. But I think, I feel like if it's Meryl Streep showing off her acting chops to the extent that it's just her being like, hey, I'm a lion. And if she can act so well that I'm watching that, I'm like, yeah, that is a lion. Then I feel like not only that, she'll get an Oscar for it.
I do believe in Meryl Streep, yeah. Sure. I mean, if she's just gonna like be on like ripping men to shreds, then yes. Sorry, I know that's intense.
It does sort of turn the whole White Witch versus Aslan fight into a sort of more fraught and Freudian in a way. In other news, the Simon and Schuster is apparently rebranding itself. The publisher Simon and Schuster is rebranding itself as sort of the A24 of books. It's trying to present itself as the new, cool, weird publisher that's willing to take risks. Among other things, it's going to cut down on quotes, blurb quotes by other authors, because it says that's a sort of a nepotistic favoritism thing of who you're friends
Huh.
with. And it is also going to do like cool internet things, like setting authors free in bookshops to do filmed shopping spree as content in order to lure young, influenceable people into the world of books.
Well, I mean, I am all for that. That's very on brand for me, but it also does help explain something weird I saw the other day, and I was like, "That's weird," which is that they are launching an audiobook imprint called Simon Maverick. So it's just audiobooks, which if you don't know,
Simon Maverick is a perfect romance hero name. Hello.
exactly, it is. Simon Maverick is a perfect romance hero name, but back in the day, audiobooks were like a very small slice of kind of an author's kind of royalty pie, and it's getting bigger and bigger as more and more people only really consume books via audio, so it's kind of smart, but it's also really interesting because the first, like, kind of wave of books that they're announcing are all books that are you can find in, like, Kindle Unlimited, essentially. So, my first question was, like, are these AI voices? Are they real voices? And actually, I guess they're real voice actors. So, I mean, but yeah, it's interesting. So they're the ones who are also kind of famously were bought by that like venture capital firm a year or two ago.
On one hand, I think if they're adapting to the taste of the audience and giving people what they want, I think that's probably a
Yeah.
good thing, bringing book reading to where people are at. I think that's a positive thing. But then there's that quote, which is often attributed, I think, to Oscar Wilde, but it's one of those ones that's floating around and is always attributed to Oscar Wilde. He must have spent his whole life saying pithy quotes, if every quote was
Sure.
attributed to him. Which is like those who attempt to meet the taste of the audience begin by underestimating it and end by debauching it. So I'm in a wait and see mode.
Yeah, exactly. I kind of feel the same. I mean, I do think that book reading, book buying, the way people consume books has changed so much that I do think it's probably smart to try and rebrand. But yeah, I'm not sure. We'll see if Simon Maverick is the way to go.
Your ad section now, because you can't be what you can't buy. Does your love interest suffer from CBD, chronic brooding disease? Summon a licensed butterfly fairy therapist directly to their remarkably well interior designed dark tower with I can't believe it's not butterhelp.com. For a small monthly subscription fee, someone can explain healthy communication to him and or distract him while you escape, depending on his baseline sexiness and where in the frenemies to lover arc you happen to be. Have you overreached yourself in some heroic way and are currently experiencing a period of unconsciousness? Try having the man you think is your enemy gently hold your head while bringing you half a glass of water. Half a glass of water, the solution to many a romantic problem. And this episode of the podcast is brought to you by Jim's Gym and Gymnasium's dystopian quarterly hero quest Shred Bonanza. Our brutal trainers will accept no excuses in the pre-quest period when you sign up to the Jim's Gym and Gymnasium app. Yes, Jim's Gym and Gymnasium. Toxic lockbox of horrifying body shaming and Chad bro muscle culture coming to track your data today. Our brutal trainers have dark pasts, undiagnosed PTSD, and a deeply personal desire to see you both suffer and improve, lest you die in the horrible way they saw a loved one die just for having weak lats or bad squat form. Autonomous Gym's fitness assist goblins will watch your every move and punish you for any infraction by screaming abuse at you from loudspeakers above your traveling quest wagon or horse, and will be fully integrated with your social media platforms so you can boast about your progress on Facebook. That's Jim's Gym and Gymnasium app for just a small monthly subscription fee, plus a completely irrational number of additional fees and charges if you want to bring the level of your service up to basic human decency. At the Platinum subscription level, we stop spitting directly into your face when you enter the gym, and at the Diamond Amex level, we remember both your name and any pre-existing condition. Jim's Gym and Gymnasium. Sweat is your fat crying, tears are your brain sweating, blood is your muscles juicing themselves for a post-workout drink. And that's your ad section for today. And that brings us to what have you been into recently, Jen? What have you been into?
I would say obviously mostly I read romance novels, everybody. That's my brand and my lane, and I pretty much am very faithful to it.
Do you stick to a particular subgenre in romance, or do you read broadly within the narrow cast?
Yeah, I mean, I read anything pretty much in no, that's not true. There's, like, some subgenres I don't read, but there are more subgenres that I do read. And I've been reading actually quite a few mafia romances, don't judge me.
Yeah, look, I'm standing by the idea that romance is speculative fiction. So what if mafia guys but hot, in that
Yes.
world, which ones would you recommend as a starter and then, like, as an advanced reader?
Oh, that's good. Okay, that's a great question. Okay, so I would say like a good starter romance. There's a series by a woman named Mila Finelli, and it's the Kings of Italy series is like what it's called, and the first one's called like Mafia Mistress or something, and it's great. And basically, and a lot of these are like, listen, I think the thing to okay, for those of you listening at home who have like, never read a romance novel, I need you to understand that these are in fact speculative fiction. They're like fantasy. And a lot in this series in particular has like sort of like an age gap thing, right? So the young woman, she's young, she's like 20, and she is going to go off to Italy. Her dad's like a mafia guy, and she's going to go off to Italy and like marry some other, get married into the mafia in Italy. And instead of falling for her, like, the guy she's engaged to, she falls in love with his dad. Am I proud of this? Yes, because it was fucking great. It's an amazing, amazing read. So that was really fun. There's a series called the Imperfectly Perfect series or Perfectly Imperfect by a woman named Neva Altaj. And the first one is called Painted Scars. And the thing that I like about this series is that all of the books are like a lot of the men have like some sort of disability that's essentially caused by like their violent lifestyle, right? So in this first book, the guy is in a wheelchair because he was, almost killed. And so I think it like really is one of the few mafia series which really like, hints heavily that like this is gonna fuck you up as a lifestyle. So
I like that idea. See, with that first Mila Finelli book, I was with you until you said father. If you'd said bodyguard, I'd be all over it. The
sure.
dynamic of a guy whose like job it is to look after you. Yes, please.
Yeah. Very hot. Very hot.
Very hot. I think I know too many dads now.
Yeah, definitely you have to for sure put a lot of what you know aside if you're going to read one of those books.
I mean, that's what it is. That's what the world of speculative fiction is. So, if you want to dip your toe into mafia romance, please do.
Also, I read Sarah my I have a podcast called Fated Mates, and my co-host Sarah McLean has a book coming out this summer called These Summer Storms, and I read her book. So, I've had a good week of reading.
That sounds amazing. So keep an eye out. When is that coming out in summer?
July 8th, I think. First week or 2 of July. Yeah.
Sarah McLean, Summer Storms, sometime early in July. Put it in your calendar to check.
Put it in your calendar. It's a banger. It's good.
I had a hankering for some Jim Butcher Dresden Files, but
Oh,
it's sort of that a specific level of what I
yeah.
call breastfeeding reading,
Yes.
which it needs to be absorbing enough that you're willing to pick it up at 2 o'clock in the morning and read it for 8
Yeah.
minutes and then put it back down.
Right, without missing much. Have you ever listened to those audiobooks?
Yes, those are magnificently well read, aren't they?
Yeah, because it's Spike from Buffy. I forget what's his real name?
James Masters. I don't know him from Buffy because I didn't watch Buffy, but I do know him from reading the Dresden Files audiobooks. Yes.
Yeah, they're great. They're really great. Yeah.
Yeah. Here's a compliment to him, which is that I can read them at night and put them back down, but if I start listening to them, I can't turn them off. So he's a
Yeah.
better reader than I am.
Then
I
yes,
guess.
he is definitely elevating that material big time. Yeah, they're great. I agree.
So I felt like that, but I didn't read the Dresden Files because there's a new one coming out. And I'd like to do a reread before I read the new one. I've been reading Shannon Maguire or Shannon Maguire. I'm not 100% sure. She has a series of like a fairy PI,
Oh, that's
half
fun.
fairy PI, and they are of a similar level of like yes this. This brings us to Trope on a Rope, which is our section where we talk about a particular trope that we either delight in every time it arrives or that just gets us the wrong way every time it arrives. My trope on a rope this week is particular to the romantasy genre, which is
Ooh.
where people get granted immortality and are pissed about it. They're really they've gone
Yes.
through some transmogrification process, slightly against their will, or they've agreed to it under duress, and they are sort of given physical health and beauty upgrades to, overnight, very wish fulfillment-y stuff, and a pretty dress and a nice house, and they're really annoyed about it, really angry, and there's no moment in the book at which it's like, "Yeah, but okay, look at these great tits I've got," or whatever.
Right, right. It's so true. That is true. You'd think they would just be more grateful, you know? Okay, I if we're going for, like, negative tropes that kinda get on our nerves a bit, I will admit that I am very tired of a trope that is very popular right now and has been popular for years, which is, like, fake dating, right? So,
Uh,
in fake dating, it's like, we for some unknown reason, the only way that, I can, go to great Aunt Mildred's birthday party is if I have a date with me. And I don't know a single solitary soul who is going to do that. So I'm going to talk someone into faking it with me. Like, right, we're going to go to this thing and tell everybody we're dating, but we're really not. And of course, that turns into like falling in love for real. But it is been I mean, I just feel like it's been years where, like, that's the only plot that exists in contemporary romance, and I'm usually pretty bored with it. I'm like, "You can't just date that person? You can't find a real date?"
well, also, I mean, yeah, if it's in contemporary romance, that seems even more sort of, I can understand in a culture where you have, like, taboos against men and women being in the same place unless they're married, or unless, there's all these pressures on. But the idea that you couldn't just be like, "I'm coming to the wedding on my own." Like, I prefer to go to movies on my own sometimes.
Right, right. Well, I actually think, like, a lot I think my theory is that the fake dating is like a easy way to create some sort of conflict that doesn't it's just like, I don't know, I think it's like a shortcut to creating a conflict. Because I think maybe the real conflicts that exist in our world for people are too intimidating to tackle, right? So I think it's kind of a shortcut to like a kind of tension that is really difficult to like, I don't know. It's interesting though. I'm over it.
I imagine it has the thing that frustrates me about a lot of books, where if they had even one single conversation about their feelings,
Right.
everything would be solved. And so then the frustration seems to be that they're idiots, at which point it's quite hard to sympathize with their plight
Yeah.
because it's entirely self-induced. Whereas if they are talking and they're like, "I really like you and I really like you, but there's all these things that are in the way, or it wouldn't work because you've got this thing and I've got this thing," that for me is far more interesting if they're trying to solve the problem together to some
The real
degree, rather
problem.
than
Right.
sort of hiding from each other the fact that they have these feelings that are really obviously reciprocated. Like he tenderly brushed
Yeah.
a strand of hair behind my ear. Why does he hate me so much? I thought, like, come
Yeah.
on, get it together, guys.
It's funny you should say that because I was reading your book, right, which is all about romance, and the thing that made me laugh probably the hardest in the book was there's a whole chart, everybody, and it's kind of like, so it's like enemies to lovers, they bang because it's set in, and then it's like, the villain is, right? And under amnesia, it's like the villain is an inability to communicate. And I was like, that is a villain in a lot of romances. Like just people who somehow just can't talk to each other at all. And I mean, that's real, right? It's real, but it also can be very frustrating.
Yeah, well, you can sort of understand it to a certain extent, and then after that extent, you're like,
Right. What are you
what are you
doing?
doing?
Yeah.
And that brings me to our subgenre deep dive for this week, which is where we take a deep dive into a particular subgenre. And I was thinking, in light of the dominance of romantasy, we don't touch enough on romance in sci-fi. So I want to
Yeah.
talk about romantic sci-fi, or sci-fi or fantasy where the sex is a mechanic in the plot, not just that they fall in love, but that it does something that they fall in love,
Yeah.
whether it's a fuck fueled time machine, or some other thing, I'd start with Lois McMaster Bujold, the Volkozigan saga. The first 2 books in that series are sort of the prequel to the main hero, and they are a romance story in which 2 people from different planets fall in love, and their planets are at war with one another, and she ends up going to his planet, and they get married. And then he's sort of more or less the prime minister, and her attitudes towards things like reproductive health change the entire course of the future of that planet. Um, so that's her
Ooh.
name's Cordelia Naismith. He's Errol Volkozigan. He's a short king, which I like. And she is a sensible hero who solves things by thinking about them and only very occasionally chops people's heads off. Yeah, that's Shards of Honor and Barayar by Lois McMaster Bujold, some of my favorite work. And then much later in the series, A Civil Campaign is a very beautiful romance in the sci-fi space.
Nice. Yeah, I mean, I think you're right that, like, there's so many romanticities and there's not as many sci-fi romances, which is, like, too bad because I really love a sci-fi romance. So, I'm gonna talk about, a series by Constance Fay, and the name of the series is Uncharted Hearts, and I'm gonna talk about the second book, which is called Fiasco. And in this book, we have a bounty hunter named Sin. And
Yes,
her deal
please.
is that I know, right? Which is great. And Sin's whole deal is that, like, everyone in the galaxies, right? Everyone in the universe practically knows that she did something, like, really monstrous, which is that she spaced an entire, like, ship full of people, which is, like, basically, like, she just opened up the airlocks, and she's the only one who had, like, a helmet on, and everyone just, like, dropped dead immediately. So she then, like, kind of the plot is that she's gonna try and find, um, this man who kidnaps children, and it has, like, there's a lot of connections to her past, and it's for one of these, like, rich space families or whatever. And so she gets the help of someone named Micah, who is like a medic on a ship she used to work on. And the thing that's really interesting about their romance is that over she like refuses to sleep. And he's a medic and he's like, "What is wrong with you? This is not good. Nobody can you got to sleep, right?" But when she falls asleep, she has these horrific nightmares. Okay, I'm about to spoil this book big time, everybody. So I'm going to try not to, but I think I'm going to have to.
Block your ears for the next 45 seconds.
Right, exactly. Like they fall in love, of course, right? What we understand is that she has experienced being out in space herself without a helmet. Now, how she survived and all that, I'm not going to spoil, but she like survived this. And so the reason she has these nightmares is because she literally like wakes up from dreams where she is like out in space suffocating. And Micah is the only person who can like bring her, right? Like they have great sex and then she can get a nap in. I'm not mad about it. And then at the end, there is like a really spectacular scene. Like, right, a big part of romance is like kind of sometimes either like groveling or the grand gesture, right? So the grand gesture is like you need to prove to the person you love that you really love them. And for plot reasons, Micah thinks that she does not really love him. And she again, I'm not going to spoil it, but I will send something you can read. I've written about the ending of this book, and I'll send it to your producer so we can like add a show notes or whatever. So it's really great because it's both about like sex as like solace, right? But also that like he is the one person in the universe who realizes that like what is going on with her is way bigger than her big bad reputation. It's great. So that one's Fiasco is the name of that one.
Fiasco. I mean, you've talked me into it.
It's great.
I would like to recommend the Locked Tomb series by Tamsin Muir, which beginning with Gideon the Ninth, they are queer space necromancers. It's sort of enemies to lovers. It's not exactly what I'd call a romance, though it's definitely a love story. I would say the distinction being that you don't feel safe in it. It's not like a relaxing. You don't know that it's going to be happily ever after, and I'm not going to tell you whether it is or not. But a lot of the kind of the interest of the book, despite all of the adventures, is whether these two people are actually going to discover and admit their feelings for one another. I really enjoyed it. And then, obviously, in sci-fi, you've got The Time Traveler's Wife and This Is How You Lose the Time War, both very fun love stories set with time travelers. But I want to recommend The Space Between Worlds by Micaiah Johnson. So Kara works as a traverser. She can travel to parallel Earths, but you can only travel to an Earth where the other you is dead. So you can't occupy the same space. But because she grew up in a really horrible neighborhood, essentially, a real slum kind of post-apocalyptic wasteland part of Earth, almost every other version of her is dead. So she's actually very well qualified to traverse. And it explores different versions of her relationship with different people in these different universes, including her time traveling or parallel universe traveling watcher, Dell, which has what I like, which is the sort of semi bodyguard, but there are class issues at play, and it's a lot of fun. There's quite a lot of good kind of social commentary, obviously, and given that she's gone from being the bottom of society to the top, but it actually doesn't deal with that unquestioningly in the way that a lot of books that have that journey do. So that is The Space Between Worlds by Micaiah Johnson.
Okay, I'm going to talk about Winter's Orbit by Everina Maxwell, and this is I think a really common thing in like a sci-fi romance is like a royal society in space, right? And so in this one we have Prince Kiem, and he is like his grandmother or great aunt, whatever. I think it's his grandmother is the empress of this like kind of one part of the system, but there's a really important deadline coming up to like essentially shore up, like a trade agreement. And she essentially calls him in. The opening of this book is like she calls him in, and he's like a bit of a himbo, if I can be honest, right? He's not really taken that seriously, and he is, kind of like everybody loves him, but nobody thinks he's like really that sharp. And she basically is like, okay, so I am going to need you to get married, and it's going to be to your future husband's name is Count Janin. And Count Janin is from another planet, like sort of the one they need to shore up this trade agreement with. But Count Janin has just been widowed. His like first husband like died like literally like 5 minutes ago, and it's one of Keem's like cousins. So Keem's like, "You want me to marry my cousin's husband?" And she was like, "Yes, and you're gonna do it like tomorrow." So the whole story is our poor himbo Keem trying to figure out what is going on with Janin, who he assumes must have had a really like happy marriage to his like far more serious and awesome cousin, and him discovering sort of the truth about what was really going on with their marriage, and that his cousin's death was not actually an accident, but maybe a murder. So it's great, and it has all that like awesome court intrigue, like but in space.
I love that. I love that. That's so good.
Yeah.
I'm going to talk about sci-fi where love or sex is a plot mechanic. In Niven's The Ring World, Engineers has the concept of Rishatra, which is sex outside one's own species that is used to seal agreement at some point. And believe it or not, that's not used to drive a romance subplot. That's just the thing that they do. Obviously, in the Terminator, Skynet not only fails to prevent the birth of humanity's savior, but it also causes it by introducing Sarah Connor to Kyle Reese in the prequels, and Sex Criminals by Fraction, which is
Oh, I love
two
sex
people
criminals.
discover they have the ability to stop time when they orgasm.
It's so good. Sex Criminals is awesome.
I love that. Of course, Anne McCaffrey, Dragon Riders of Pern, and I cannot let a section like this go past without probably the godmother of romantasy, which is the Cushiel series by Jacqueline Carey.
Yeah, those are all really classics. Yeah. So on my podcast, we recently had an episode where I talked about what I call the sci-fi romance continuum from like serious sci-fi to slutty sci-fi. Let me talk about one. I've only been talking about serious sci-fi because you think you're ready for slutty sci-fi, and you might be, but I'm going to get there next. But first, I want to talk about one more, what I will call serious sci-fi, which is one of my favorite sci-fi romance authors is Jessie Mihalik, and she writes one of her first series was called The Consortium Rebellion, and my favorite book of this series is the second one, and it's called Aurora Blazing. And in this series, the main characters, it's like are like some siblings, right? So like the first book is about one sibling, but in this second book, Bianca is the main character, and she has also been married. And she was married again, like it was sort of like one of these royal weddings, right? So she was married to like some powerful guy from another one of these families. And she was really miserable, which kind of her family knew. And her husband unexpectedly dies, and she gets sort of sent back to her own house, right? And she promised herself, like basically, I am never going to get married again. And it turns out that like one of the things that kind of gradually is uncovered is that her first husband was like experimenting on her. And so
Uh,
she has a lot of really like she's just like almost like it's like PTSD. And so what happens is her older brother disappears, and she and the director of security, Ian, have to essentially try and find her brother. And like she is just like Ian, of course, is like the last person she wants to see because she's pretty convinced that if they spend time together, he will figure out what happened to her. And she is just like kind of ashamed of what that was, even though it wasn't her fault, and like doesn't want anyone to know. So they go on a big space adventure, big like space opera kind of vibes. But I also thought it was just like a really beautiful story about like kind of similar to the first one I mentioned, but like Bianca's like sort of trauma and how deeply she wants to like just like move past it, but she can't because she can't let it go. Right. But Ian is going to help her. And I really, really love this book. So that's Aurora Blazing by Jessie Malik.
that sounds incredible. For people who want more, these lists go on and on of recommendations from people. So you can go on to Blue Sky. We have a Realms Unknown handle, and I will always ask each week what people's recommendations are for our subgenre deep dive. So if this is a subgenre that like really floats your boat, you can find sort of an infinity of recommendations, or at least 20 recommendations under my weekly posts. Which brings us to the Minds of our section, where we talk about books that we loved at some point in our past, but now feel a little bit like ugh, about something
Hmm.
in them. We talk about it, and then maybe whether we're still into it, whether we could still recommend it, which bits we'd suggest you skip, and so on. So, in terms of sex mechanics in fantasy, I'm going to go to the Dragon Riders of Pern, which just formed the backbone of a lot of my reading when I was a teenager. There's quite a lot of sort of plot mechanic being driven by the fact that you bond to a dragon, and not everyone, but the cool people, the people that we're interested in, bond to dragons, and then when the dragons go into heat and mate with their mate, then you are sort of forced into going along with them. So it's sort of a ponfar going into heat situation, and obviously that has lots of implications for the dynamics between people because you might sort of suddenly be in a room and have to bang the person you're with. So obviously a bit about things like class and consent. And certainly Anne McCaffrey had some questionable theories about same sex attraction, but so much fun.
Yeah. I mean, listen, I think it's one of the things that's really hard is like, I think there are books like we grandfather in, right? Like, so you read it at a time when you didn't know the things you know now, and you can still kind of like read it and kind of like go back to that earlier state, right? But I think it can be just really hard to do when you're, you know, and then you kind of know better. So I would say in romance in general, were a lot of like really like foundational kind of paranormal, which I think is like a kissing cousin to pure sci-fi series in the like kind of 2000s, right? So, lots of like vampire romances or right, like there was a whole series by a woman named J.R. Ward, and they're still going on, called the Black Dagger Brotherhood. And the thing about these books is like I loved them at the time, but they are very like super heteronormative now, right? Like it's like, manly, masculine vampires who are just always so powerful. And then, these like, dainty women they find or whatever. And a lot of the ways they talk about gender or like sexuality are just seem dated now, right? And it's like one of those things where I can sort of, I don't think they're like, terrible or doing something evil, right? They're still really foundational, but like for sure they had that moment where you're like, oh, like, why is he saying that? My female. Like, what's happening? Right.
Yeah, yeah. When I think of the minds of, I think of all of those like really fun black and white caper romance movies where he like shut up woman and slaps her in the face and then they smooch and you're like, ah, it's so beautiful.
Right.
Um,
Punishing kisses, all that kind of stuff, right?
yeah, but I think if it did something at the time and you didn't know any better, maybe it laid down some questionable wiring. But I think I can still see. I don't know if I would still recommend the Dragon Riders of Pern to anyone other than sort of a 12-year-old in the 90s or early 2000s.
But you know what? I have heard people talk about how foundational that was to them at the time. So, I mean, we know better and we do better, but, our buttons were still installed the way they were installed. What can you do about it, right?
Yep, that's how they were. That's how they are. What is the best thing right now? Something that you particularly enjoyed and that brings you joy?
Well, I mean, I'm always going to say romance because it's my favorite. And one of the things I think the kind of the reasons for that for me is that, no matter how hard times are for, you know, people in a book, no matter what problems they are facing, they are going to like figure it out and end up happily ever after and like figure out a way to like make that work. So like any romance, like that's like the draw for me. So that's one thing. I very much enjoy the TV show Jack Reacher, and I enjoy those Jack
Oh,
Reacher books. They are
yes.
kind of anti-romance in a way. That man has absolutely no feelings, but he does know how to wield a startling variety of weapons.
With his massive hands.
Oh, yeah. That actually, like, one of the funniest it's Twitter no longer exists, like, less, but there was a really funny thread once of a guy who just went through and pulled out all the descriptions of Reacher's hands from the book, like, right? Like, his hands were the size of dinner plates or, like, small, like, hams. Like, is is this a man or were you just really hungry, right, when you ate it? And then I would say that, here in Chicago, we are headed towards summer. And it's just like the best time of year here. So I just really love to like have, I don't know, like rooftop bars be opening again and like riding your bike on the lakefront and, all of the really fun ways that like shows itself in this town, right? Like the tulips are, the daffodils are up and the tulips will be up soon. And I really love that.
Those are things that bring me joy just even in imagining them. I don't think tulips grow where I am right now, but
Oh,
I like the idea of tulips. A reminder, if you're listening, to subscribe to the Bugle channel and all the books and shows and games that we covered here. I think it was mostly books this week, but there are some great games recommendations over in Blue Sky about romance storylines in games, which tend to be more optional. But if you want to pursue them, there's some really beautiful and moving romance storylines and plot drivers. your action plan of 3 things to pursue out in the world this week. Why not dip your toe into mafia romance and hope it doesn't get bitten off, starting with the Kings of Italy series by Mila Finelli or the Perfectly Imperfect series by Neva Altaj. In terms of romance in sci-fi, look at Jen's recommendation of Fiasco from the Uncharted Hearts series by Constance Fay. Alternatively, or additionally, try another of Jen's romance and sci-fi tips, Winter's Orbits, which is a space opera novel from Everina Maxwell. Jen, have you got anything to plug?
You should listen to the Fated Mates podcast if you want to listen to more romance news. That's all we cover. And we did actually have an entire episode about space romance, I don't know, within like the past month. So we will talk more, and that's honestly where you're going to have to go if you want to hear more about slutty sci-fi. That's where it is.
That is the place to go. I can also highly recommend Fated Mates as a podcast. It was one of the big inspirations for Realms Unknown, because I would always leave it with I should read that list, which is what I want to give to you, our listener. I want you to walk away from these podcasts with a list of things that you love to read or watch or play. And you can find me online at patreon.com/Alice Fraser, where I run 4 writers' meetings a week, 1 comedy, 1 admin, and 2 general writers' meetings. If you're working on something and you want to work on it with other people, including me, head over to patreon.com/Alice Fraser. And I've got a book. It's called A Passion for Passion. It is available now online everywhere in the world, but it will be coming out in the US on the 5th of May. So go to your local bookshop and order it. That's a thing that you would like to do. This is a Bugle podcast and Alice Fraser production. Your editor is Ped Hunter. Your executive producer is Chris Skinner. I'll talk to you again next week.